Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General Hospital. Today's session is part of our Mass General for Children Parenting Series, a special collaboration between the Blum Center and Mass General for Children. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few items with you all. Please note that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that you are in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted so they can hear our guest speakers today. If you have any questions for our guest speakers, you may use the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for them in the end. Only Blum Center staff, our co-host, and guest speakers will see your questions. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. Lastly, at the end of today's session, you'll be directed to a brief survey, which we'd like to ask you to help us complete. Your feedback is important to us as we plan future programs. All right, so next I'm going to turn it over to Brianna Beckfold. She is the project manager and editor for Mass General for Children, and she will introduce you all today's guest speakers.
Hi, thank you, Amy. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks for coming to this virtual session of the MGfC Parenting Series, where experts share their knowledge with patients, family, and staff on various pediatric health topics. This year, as Amy said, we're co-hosting the series with the Blum Patient and Family Learning Center at Mass General. My name is Brianna Beckfold, and I'm a project manager and editor at Mass General for Children, which is the pediatric branch of Mass General. And today we have 3 of our registered dietitians from pediatric gastroenterology and nutrition. We have Meaghan Alexander, Simona Lourekas, and Kelly Millan. So before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. First is Meaghan Alexander. She's a senior clinical dietitian in the Center for Feeding and Nutrition with special interest in general gastroenterology and food allergies. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and her master's degree in food and nutrition from Framingham State University. Our next speaker is Simona Lourekas, and she is also a registered dietitian with special interest in feeding concerns, food allergies, celiac disease, irritable bowel disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. She earned her bachelor's degree in public health education from James Madison University in Virginia, and her master's degree in nutrition science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And then our next speaker is Kelly Millan. She is a registered dietitian with special interest in infant and toddler nutrition, lactation counseling, IBS and IBD, food allergies, and healthy growth. She earned her bachelor's degree in business administration from Northeastern University here in Boston, and her master's degree in nutrition and health promotion from Simmons University, also here in Boston. So as our speakers present, we can take questions from the audience in the chat box, and we'll go over them in the end. And from here, I will hand it over to our speakers.
All right, let me get the slides up. I'll be starting off. I'm Simona, one of the registered dietitians, and then you'll also be hearing from my lovely colleagues, Kelly and Meaghan afterwards. But we're going to talk today about, picky eating and setting the stage for healthy habits. So starting off, we know that there's a lot of things that make feeding so challenging as pediatric dietitians. And we know that some of these issues are things that many parents will face when it comes to raising a healthy eater, and that parents aren't able to, control everything about a child's eating. When we think about children having an independent mind and will, and that there are, outside influences that may impact their eating habits, and just how we can't always, control their grades, behaviors, life choices. We can't always control everything that we're eating, that they're eating, but there's still, some things that are under our control. So we're going to be talking about, some of these things you see here on the slide. There's a lot of nutrition information all around us. Some of it may or may not be truthful. So we'll talk more about how to sort of discern which information seems accurate. Our lives can be fast-paced, but sometimes the food options that match our lifestyle aren't always the healthiest choices. And children are often told to eat in a healthy way, but then are presented with many convenience foods that don't always, sort of meet those requirements. So we're going to talk more about, some of these influences and what parents, can do to kind of make an impact. And now can be, a good time to be thinking about some of this as we're all, with the back to school routines. So now can be a good time to get into some good routines and some good habits. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so the next slide. So, what to eat. Many of us have seen, this image here from the USDA and myplate.gov that shows, a balanced plate. And this is what Massachusetts this year has free school lunches for everyone, and they do base those around this idea of having all of the food groups in there. And the myplate.gov website does have some helpful resources, recipes, activities, coloring sheets, things to just make the idea of talking about healthy food a little bit more fun. But the overall goal is to increase our whole foods and decrease our more processed foods. Because we find the more processed foods have more sugar, sodium, processed oils, food additives, and they have less fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. And the research shows that eating a whole food based diet, leads to healthier weight, lower risk of chronic diseases. And then that is a better focus instead of, focusing on restricting just fat or carbohydrates. And sometimes processed food marketing will tell us that, those foods give us the same benefits as eating, whole foods, but we'll show some examples of why the whole food would be better. And, some specifics about each of these food groups on the screen. With the lean proteins, those give us protein, iron, zinc, omega-3s. Whole grains give us, carbohydrates, fiber, B vitamins, iron. Fruits and vegetables, fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals. And we kind of group those together because there's some overlap between the fruits and vegetables. So if your child is really not interested in the vegetables, you could offer more fruits, or you could speak with your pediatrician to see if they need any kind of supplements. And then with the dairy group, mainly calcium, vitamin D, protein. And then for younger children, the higher fat versions do offer some fat sources. And then lastly, the healthy fats, like the ones listed, they help our body with absorbing some of our fat-soluble vitamins. All right, so next slide. So here's some photos that show examples of ways you could include all of the, the food groups into a meal. And, while these are presented very nicely, we do want to be sort of realistic about how much the child may eat. So we wouldn't expect them to always finish everything on their plate. And we know that there's going to be fluctuations depending on, are they going through a period of growth? Is it a food that they like? Are they sort of eating differently from one day to the next? And we sometimes compare hand sizes, which can be helpful since we can see that different people at the table might have different size hands, and we might expect different portion sizes. So in general, carbohydrates may be the size of the fist, meat may be the size of the palm. So we definitely, would expect the child to be eating maybe a little bit less than some of the adults. But as long as, they're growing okay, then it is good to allow them to sort of regulate that a bit on their own, and let them have some fluctuations between different meals and foods. All right. Okay, so some of the pitfalls that we're going to be talking about today: food and beverage marketing, picky eating, and the junk food lover. So there's a Federal Trade Commission report that shows us, how much money is being spent to market towards children and teens. It's mainly for fast foods, carbonated beverages, and breakfast cereals. And we do know, during the pandemic that, all of us have really had more screen time. So the exposure to some of this food marketing, has increased during this time. And oftentimes the food marketing advertisements are colorful. They have fun characters, recognized television characters or celebrities. They show other children having fun. And research shows us that up until the age of 8, children don't really understand that the marketing is biased. So they'll believe what they see and hear. So if they think that the people in the advertisement are having fun and enjoying themselves, with that food or drink, then they'll believe that. So, something to keep in mind. So there's the marketing towards the kids, and then there's also marketing towards parents, trying to claim that nutrient poor products, will improve their health. Right. And then moving it over to Kelly, but I'll keep helping with the slides here.
Okay, so now we'll discuss some strategies for overcoming the exposure to food marketing. So first, limiting screen time, of course, as much as you can. We can see food marketing in commercials or advertisements, but also directly within shows and movies themselves with product placement. Marketing and advertising companies spend a ton of money, and they learn about how to target their audience, how to target kids, how to target parents, and it really works. So while we can't totally limit our kids' exposure to these types of advertising or screens altogether, be mindful of why your child might be asking you for a certain type of brand or type of food. It might just be because they saw it on TV. It might be because they saw the ad or they saw a character having it. So you can start that conversation with them. Next, we have learning about some eating habits at home. So parent modeling can be really important. Your kids want to be just like you in a lot of ways, and food is no different. So be aware that your kids are learning about food behaviors directly through you and anyone else who's living in the home with you. It can be really helpful to eat as many meals that you can together as much as your schedule allows, so that you can do that food modeling with them. With family values about nutrition and food, talk out loud about what's important to you and your family about food. For example, are there cultural influences that you can talk about? Is it important that you eat together or that you cook together, share meals and talk together as a family? It's never too early to express these types of things, both verbally and with your actions. Discussing advertising. So that can be really important. As Simona mentioned, kids don't understand that ads are selling them something. They can't really distinguish between the advertisement and the TV show. So you can start by just talking to them about that difference. Like, this is a commercial and it's trying to sell you something. It's selling you this product, whereas this is the show or the movie and that's telling you a story. So trying to kind of draw that difference between those two things. You can also highlight to them how in ads, food is often prepared by a special artist to look perfect. And that's not how it's always going to be when you get it at home. And sometimes the foods in the ads aren't even edible. Mindful eating is really just talking about how you enjoy food and taking the time to taste your food and experience that meal, pointing out maybe some of the health benefits depending on the age of your child, talking about little things that they're getting from the food, they're getting stronger and helping them grow, and really just enjoying that experience of sharing a meal together. And then having healthy options available, like convenience foods and snacks, is really important, especially for older kids who are encouraged to make their own choices about what they're eating and can kind of go to the cabinet and grab what they would like. It's really nice to have quick options that are balanced and nutritious so that eating healthy doesn't feel like a burden all the time. And we'll talk a little bit about what to look for on food labels when you're choosing these types of foods in a couple slides. So the last thing, food labels, we'll get into, in these next few slides. So what are we looking for? So less than 5 grams of sugar, especially with added sugar. So there's some recent changes on food labels, and there's a separation between total sugar and added sugar. So we'll especially be looking for as little added sugar as possible. Less than 5 grams is ideal. So added sugars are sugars that are added in processing and include things like table sugar, sucrose or dextrose, sugars from syrups or even honey, and sugars from concentrated fruit or vegetable juices. That doesn't include naturally occurring sugars. So there are natural sugars in milk, in fruits, and in vegetables that will be part of the total sugar, but not part of the added sugar. So few recognizable ingredients is also something you want to be looking for, especially at the beginning of the ingredients list, because ingredients lists, they list the products, the specific ingredients in order of abundance in the item. So the first product listed is the most abundant and so on. So especially those first few ingredients should be recognizable and whole ingredients. You might see things like the long name of a vitamin or calcium carbonate, which is similar to baking soda. Those aren't necessarily things that you would just not buy a product for, and you're not trying to avoid these types of things altogether, but especially focusing on having few ingredients, and at the beginning, you want to be able to recognize them. And then what does that food provide you? So things that you want in a little bit more abundance, things like fiber, looking for more than 3 grams per serving, protein, more than 5 grams, vitamins and minerals. While they're not all listed on the package, if they are trying to aim for over 10% of the daily value is helpful. But if an item doesn't hit all of those points, those fiber, protein, vitamins, and minerals, you can always pair it with something. Like Simona was saying, it's really important to pair things with whole foods. You can always do a fruit or a vegetable to add some fiber, or some yogurt or dairy to add some protein. So you can always complete a packaged item by pairing it up. And I also want to note that it's important to think about serving size on food labels, which is really interesting for kids because really young kids probably taking less than the serving size that's listed, whereas older kids and teens are probably taking more, just generally speaking. So just keep in mind, look at what that is and consider how does that compare to what your child is eating. If you think they'll only take half, then you'll have everything else on the ingredients list. If you think they'll take twice as much, you'll multiply everything by 2. And that can be really important, especially when you're thinking about things like added sugars, which add up really quickly if you're having more than one serving. So we're going to look at some food labels specifically and make some observations and comparisons. So first we have this cereal that is being marketed as high protein. So it's selling you that it has an added benefit for the high protein. Then we look a little bit more closely at the food label and see lots of ingredients. So notably, there's more than one type of sugar listed. So the label on the front says sweetened with real honey, which does sound great, but there's a lot of other sugar sources here. Brown sugar, corn syrup, molasses. So in total, 17 grams of sugar per serving, so quite a bit. So that's actually more than 4 Chips Ahoy cookies if you compare that to another product. And one serving has about 7 grams of protein without milk, which is about as much as 1 egg, and with the milk, 11 grams total, which is a good amount compared to most cereals, but it's not a crazy amount. So on the next slide, we'll compare that to same cereal, but the plain version. So right away, you notice far fewer ingredients. And then looking deeper at the sugars, only 1 gram of sugar, there's 3 grams of fiber, and you can actually get 7 grams of protein when you serve this cereal with milk. So not a huge difference from the added protein cereal. And you can customize a plain cereal with flavor like cinnamon or fruit to make it whatever you'd like and to add a little bit more fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So the marketing of the protein cereals made it seem like it was a superior product, but nutritionally speaking, when we look a little bit more closely, this option is a little bit more favorable, and it really does show you that the marketing was what kind of grabbed you in the first product. So this is a great example here. You don't see it directly on the product, but it says made with real fruit. And this is a common marketing tool. So using the word fruit, whether in a phrase or in the title itself, like fruit snacks, that's a big marketing tool towards parents on kids' products. So what's interesting is that this product's fruit component is actually fruit juice, and it's thickened with other ingredients. And you can see on the ingredients list, there's a really long list, and a lot of those are the thickening ingredients. And the jelly on the inside is actually just that thickened juice and not whole fruit. And you can see that the 12 grams of sugar are all added sugars. So that's a tip off right away that none of it came from a whole fruit. And it's quite a big bit of sugar. So 12 grams is equal to 3 Chips Ahoy cookies. So that can be a really good thing to keep in mind when you're looking at snack bars in particular, because they do tend to kind of use marketing phrases to highlight potential benefits, but they are often really high in added sugar and not usually very well balanced with fiber, protein, and fats. And here's a snack cracker. So this one has no added sugar, does have a good amount of fiber, 3 grams of protein. So this becomes a great base. So this is one of those examples that you could be adding other foods, like a whole food, like fruit, like apple slices for a few grams of fiber, some vitamin C. There's actually some iron in these crackers, so vitamin C can help with that absorption. So you could do some fruit or some vegetables, serve it with something like hummus for some fiber and protein. So this one's a great one for layering in other things, or it doesn't have a lot of sugar in it as a starting point. But this is also a good example of a product that its marketing isn't geared towards children, right? It's not very bright, has few colors, no characters. It's not really jumping out at a kid's preference. So, you know, it's nearly impossible for your kid to avoid exposure to those bright colors and those exciting products. So if they do have a preference towards those things, you can maybe consider letting them jazz up a box with stickers, or you can even think about taking products out of the packaging when you get home and packaging them in clear containers so they really can't differentiate between something packaged in a bright box versus not. So this one is a yogurt smoothie type product. So notably, we see right off the bat, there's a good amount of sugar here. But one thing that it does note, and its marketing phrase is nutrition parents will love. But what nutrition does this product really provide? So looking at it, it's pretty low in calories, not really a lot else going on here, low in protein. There is some calcium, it's yogurt, but to meet 1 serving of calcium with this product, a child would have to drink 3 of them. So 3 servings is 27 grams of sugar. So that's quite a bit of sugar, over 2 tablespoons in just that one, 3 servings to get to the amount of calcium you want. So in order to get nutrition parents will love, you are making some sacrifices. So be mindful of those types of things as well, health claims and how that actually plays out from a nutrition perspective. Next one is, so the next one is just a plain yogurt. So this does have some sugar, and any yogurt will, and any dairy product will, because it naturally has lactose. But this one is showing us that there's no added sugar and there's a considerable amount of protein. So that's great. Another example of a base food that you can add some stuff to if you want to customize flavors and add a little bit more fiber, vitamins and minerals. You can add fruit, nuts, nut butters, granola, all that good stuff that will allow your child to kind of like play with it and have a little bit of fun while adding some more nutrient density. Next one. So our last one is orange juice. So juices are really important to take a look at. For years, orange juice was marketed as a part of a complete and healthy breakfast, and especially because it's fortified with calcium. So trying to be closer to something like milk, but very differently from milk, it has a lot more sugar. And it's even in an 8-ounce glass, which is quite small, there are 22 grams of sugar. And that's almost 2 tablespoons or 5.5 sugar cubes worth of sugar. So yes, there's a lot of vitamin C in something like a fruit juice, but you can get vitamin C from any fruit or veggie, and having more than 100% of vitamin C or any water-soluble nutrient there's no added benefit to it because we'll just pee it out. So there's no reason for you to want a product that has more than 100% of vitamin C. And we can compare this to just one small orange, which has 45 calories, a few grams of fiber, and only 9 grams of sugar. So next, Meaghan will be taking over.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to be starting talking about the second pitfall, which is the picky eater. So all children need to learn to accept and to eat new foods. Some do it with ease, and you might have another child in your family who really struggle with it. Picky eating is defined as an unwillingness to eat novel foods, and it's thought to be adaptive behavior, ensuring that children during this time consume a lot of foods and making sure that they're feeling safe during this period. And so it's common in children ages 2 to 6. So a child may reject or fear a new food or only accept a couple of their favorite foods. And it can be really short-lived, maybe for a couple months. And it can also be really prolonged or extreme. And children that are underweight, normal weight, overweight can struggle with picky eating. And sometimes we're amazed to see that during picky eating, growth is preserved. It's a really challenging phase of childhood. It can be extremely frustrating for parents. And it can lead to, guilt, worrying about your child going to bed hungry, really unpleasant, stressful meal times, and can lead a parent to try really anything. So what we see a lot of time is parents getting really frustrated. And when that happens, parents might engage in a mealtime battle, might be really stressed. You're trying to control what your children are eating. That makes for a very stressful mealtime. And stressful mealtimes are just that. They're very stressful. And pressure from parents is often counterproductive in helping a child to add new foods into their diet. And if you engage in a mealtime battle, most likely you'll be met with a lot of resistance. Kids tend to really dig in their heels, a lot of emotions, and it might be, okay in the short run, maybe you get your child to eat a few more bites of broccoli, but in the long term, it's not super helpful, especially for the picky eater. And so what does pressure look like? It comes in all forms. So it might be, saying, just take one more bite. And it could be like, a small bite of chicken or broccoli. We've seen parents, force or threaten their children at the dinner table, using food or using dessert or a highly palatable food as a reward. So if you finished your broccoli, you can have ice cream, that sort of thing. That can be felt as pressure. Evaluating your child's mealtime performance based off of what they ate, and positive reinforcement. Too much of it can seem like pressure to a child. So providing too much overt praise can be felt as pressure for a child to perform, and they might, again, lead to more feeding refusal or mealtime refusal. Okay, so what can we do? So we like to focus on, as dietitians, Ellen Satter, her name's right on the slide there, the division of responsibility in feeding, or the feeding dynamic model. So Ellen Satter is really the authority on this, and she came up with this evidence-based framework in which we can think about feeding our child. So instead of really trying to focus on control and pressure, it's a more loving way, it's a more gentle way to think about your feeding relationship with your child. So there's a job for the parent and there's a job for the child. So as a parent, your responsibility or your job is to choose what food, where, and when. So the what would be choosing the food at the grocery store, bringing it into the house, preparing it, being considerate to your child's preferences without really catering to it. We can talk about that more later. And then the where and the when would be providing structured meals. So the breakfast, lunch, and dinner at predictable times in the same spot, distraction-free, that are pleasant, no mealtime battles. The child's job or their responsibility is to decide how much of the food they want to eat on the dinner table and whether or not they want to eat it. And the whole, if this relationship is upheld, if you're doing your job, then your child should be able to do their job. So trusting that if we do our job with feeding, our child should do their job with eating. Another way to approach this is exposure. So a lot of the times, exposure is key. So experience with food helps your child get more comfortable, more confident, just like adults. If we're trying a new food for the first time, we might be a little bit more skeptical, more cautious. Your child is learning to like a lot of new foods during this time or during childhood. some childs will pick up a new food really quickly, and others it might take years. And research really does show that it can take up to 20 times of an exposure to a new food before a child will accept it. And even practitioners working with extremely picky eating, it can take up to 50 times. So it's definitely a time investment. Keeping it positive, it's very, it can be frustrating and mundane if you're making a food or buying a food and your child isn't taking to it right away. It can be frustrating, but keeping it positive and that exposure is really critical to helping your child like to learn a new food and trying all different foods. There's thousands of different foods out there. And just like we have our own preferences, your child does too. And then the third bullet is play is okay. So it's reasonable to change our expectations to allow your child to explore the food without maybe the expectation that they'll put it in their mouth and swallow it. So they can learn about the characteristics by, feeling it on their tray, by smelling it, by, putting it up to their mouth, by looking at it, by having it on their plate, seeing it on your plate. Those are all ways that they're engaging with the food, interacting with the food, learning its characteristics. And that's a good thing, that's positive. So sometimes it gets messy, but play is okay. We want them to learn and to be interested in the food. And it might take that time to get them to eventually like be comfortable putting it in their mouth and swallowing it. Another way to approach this is establishing and maintaining like a family meal. So having that structure gives your child an opportunity that's distraction-free, hopefully pressure-free environment, and it really provides a great structure and time for your child to learn to eat the foods that your family's eating. It gives you a chance to role model. So again, by the time you've gotten to the table, the majority of the work has been done. You've decided what to prepare, where, and when, and now you get to serve, enjoy the food that you're serving yourself. And that's a really, helpful thing for your child to see you enjoying the food and enjoying the meal, and to be a role model. And including 1 or 2 safe foods along with new food. So this can be helpful. So a lot of times if you have 1 or 2 sides like bread or rice that your child feels comfortable eating, having those safe foods, although they might eat a lot of them at first, helps them feel comfortable to then venture outside of those safe foods and try new foods on the dinner table. Another good trick is, I think Simona had said this, serving fruit. Vegetables are difficult for young children and for picky eaters. They can taste really bitter, so sometimes those don't come until later. So serving fruit can offer some nutrition if your child isn't eating vegetables yet. Flavoring vegetables well, using fat when you're roasting them, putting a little maple syrup on them. So flavoring them up so that children might learn to accept them, and then you can always pull back on those things. And family style. So allowing placing meal components in the center of the table and having each person serve themselves. If your child is school aged, this is a great opportunity to have your child take a little bit of control of the meal. Again, you've put all of the components on the table. So you're saying all of those are safe foods for your child to eat and allowing them to have a little control in what they're serving. And we have some families that use a no thank you plate. So it's a separate small plate, separate from their dinner plate, for the sole purpose of food play or exploration. It's helpful for a child that doesn't want that new food on their plate yet or doesn't want to eat it yet. They can have the no thank you plate and sort of serve it there. The expectation would just be to interact with it. Again, maybe you have them smell it, touch it. What does it look like? Talk about the color, the characteristics. Takes the pressure off the child and allows them really to just interact in a fun way with the food. And then introduction of solids. So if you have a baby 4 to 6 months, based off their feeding readiness, so holding his or her head up consistently for longer periods of time, if they're sitting with support, if they're showing interest in your food at snacks and meal times, and they're probably ready to start solids, you could talk with their pediatrician about it. And by the time they're 6 months, A breastfeeding infant will need more iron and zinc for their development. And delayed introduction of more textured food can lead to picky eating. So really trying to start solids when they're ready and, following their feeding cues, advancing their textures to maybe more mashed foods, more table foods by the time they're 9 months. And children are biologically driven to more sweet, really savory, salty foods, but their preferences can be shaped in early infancy and toddlerhood. So exposing them to all different flavors during early infancy, later infancy helps with their food acceptability later on in life. And then we just wanted to mention ARFID. So ARFID is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and that's different from picky eating. We've been talking about the typical picky eater, but this ARFID is an eating disorder, and we sort of think about it as extreme picky eating. The main cause is typically different that of typical picky eating. And I've included the DSM criteria. So, a disturbance in a child's eating pattern that's associated with a nutritional deficiency, weight loss or growth faltering, decline in psychological functioning, and dependency on nutritional status to maintain their nutritional well-being. And it can't be explained by external factors like food insecurity, and it's separate from an eating disorder that has a disorder in body image. So it's separate from that. And if you feel like your child is more of this extreme picky eating, we would recommend talking to your pediatrician about it and maybe finding a specialist to help work with you. And the last pitfall we're going to talk about is the junk food lover. Dietitians don't love the word junk food because, it's food. And so what we mean by that is food that is high in fat, high in sugar. And we know that complete omission of these foods or really restricting them, forbidding them, does not work. Too many restrictions can really backfire, just like the more pressure we put on our kids, the more they're going to dig on in their heels. If we're really focusing on highly palatable foods and trying to avoid them, then your child might be driven to eat more of them. So that might be leading to children sneaking food, overeating, or feeling shameful. So a solution for that would be kind of including them in the diet. Your children are going to grow up and these are foods that are going to be in their food environment, and allowing them to learn how to approach these and what's the right way for them in their body. How do you include them in your diet in a way that doesn't influence their overall nutrition too much? So we like to think of that as fun foods. 1 or 2 servings is fine to include depending on your child's age and their activity level. And really being matter of fact about it and not talking about it too much or focusing on it too much. Sometimes people will even put like a single serving dessert on their family meal, allowing a child to sort of have a single serving dessert at the dinner table, or serving them from time to time at a snack time to allow your child to learn to eat it. And you want to be as neutral about these high fat, high sugar foods as you are about broccoli and carrots. So really not putting a lot of emphasis on it, allowing them to have a serving or 2 in a day, so that they can be as neutral about it as possible. And we know that too much dieting and restriction can lead to an eating disorder later on. So we want to be careful that we're not overly restricting our children. So in conclusion, what you can do is, like Simona said, focusing on whole foods for the majority of their nutrition. And we know that strategies that help build a healthy eater, help grow a healthy eater, would be repeated exposure to healthy foods that you're eating in your family time, avoiding pressure, maintaining a positive family meal, and not being too focused on or too tightly restricting high fat, high sugar foods to allow your child to learn to eat them appropriately. I think we have our references are at the end.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We have quite a few questions that have come in while you were presenting, so we can move on to those. So the first one, if you have a child who's in the maybe 5 to 7 year old range who is a picky eater, what is a reasonable amount of time that they should spend eating a meal? And what do you recommend if they have not eaten most of their meal after about an hour?
There is a night, I know we mentioned Ellen Satter as well. Let me see, I can see if I can find the link to it. But she does have an article about sort of, those lengthy meals, which sometimes can be, maybe that's the time that the family's getting together and people want to sort of interact. So I'd say kind of looking to see what amount of this time is really focused on eating and what is maybe sort of socializing or doing other things, and trying to keep the, eating part of it to about 30 minutes or so. We just find if the meal, if you're sort of chasing them around for an hour or picking on it, that it will actually sort of bleed into the next meal or snack, versus if at some point, you give sort of maybe a 5-minute warning of, we're going to, as you're getting closer to that 30-minute mark, you mention, okay, we're going to pack this up and, maybe have this later, give them, if you want to have any more, you can, finish that up now. We find that's actually more helpful because then they'll be a little bit hungrier when it comes to that next meal or snack or that next day, versus if they're sort of picking on it all throughout the day and not having that time to get hungry. But we know it's sort of easier said than done and sometimes can take a little time to get that transition. But let me see, I'll see if I can find that article and put it in the chat.
Okay. Should we move on to the next one while you do that?
Yeah, unless anyone else wants anything to add.
No. Okay. Our next one is for 1 to 2 year olds. If they don't show an interest in a new food item, how long should I wait to try again? Okay, and then Simona just put the link to that article in the chat for anyone who is interested. All right, so for 1 to 2 year olds, if they don't show any interest in a new food, how long should I wait to try again?
So it can vary. You can kind of use what has historically worked. Like, have you tried new foods in the past? A week is probably like a good rule of thumb if you think you need several days, but you could really just try it a few days later and see how it goes. And it also depends on what the food is, because if it's like a fruit or a vegetable, that also changes in ripeness level. And every single time you're having one of those fresher foods, it's going to be a different experience. The child's going to, know that it's different. That's why they kind of tend towards those packaged foods that are more consistent. So if you offer it again in a couple of days and have that conversation about like, they're going to be different every time, or prepare it differently, maybe it's mashed one day and it's whole the next time, or it's mixed into yogurt one time and it's plain the next time, kind of switch things up and offer it in different ways. I would try it within a few days. If that doesn't go well, then maybe you give it a week. But that's probably as long as you want to go if it's really not going well. But if it's like, this is something I hate, then you can go longer. It really, there's no like hard and fast rule when it comes to that kind of thing. And every kid is a little bit different, but as Meaghan mentioned, it can take 20 exposures, and for really picky eaters, up to 50 exposures before a kid even wants to taste a food. So keep that in mind. And like, it's always like a good idea to, if it's just at the table or on their plate, even if they're putting it aside, those are positive food exposures.
Okay. Our next question is, what tips do you have for families who are on the run from school to soccer and other activities during dinner time? Unfortunately, meals tend to happen in the car.
I have another one I'll stick in the chat too, since there's always lovely other dietitians who, always put out some materials, because these are common questions that we get from a lot of families. You know, it again depends a bit if there's any wiggle room in the schedule. So you could sort of see if there is any timing that you could sort of adjust the meals or snacks so that you could still do some of them at home and then maybe just have sort of a quick snack in the car. But if it sort of needs to be in the car, you know, I can put an article here that has some ideas of some things that won't make quite as much of a mess, but still sort of trying to get in, you know, a few different food groups in there. And then we understand that, you know, sometimes you may have to sort of go and pick something up on the go. It's just trying to, you know, sort of have that not be sort of the majority of the nutrition.
Simona froze.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
You froze there for a sec, Simona,
Oh,
but
sorry.
I think we caught most of it.
Okay. Yeah. I was just seeing if anyone else had any other thoughts. I'll stick in that other article that kind of talks about having some quick options, trying to sort of adjust the schedule to see if you can do some of the eating at home, and then understanding that you may occasionally need to go kind of pick something up on your way.
Yeah, I think I'll add, like, you can think of it like if you pack lunch for school, very similarly, you can just pack dinner for wherever that's going to happen and maybe get a cool lunchbox and, you know, the same recipes that you might see online for school, for packing lunch, you could use for dinner. It doesn't have to be a hot meal for it to be well balanced.
Perfect. All right. Our next question is, my 2-year-old son sometimes won't have more than a few bites of his dinner, even if it's foods that he has eaten and liked before. We generally go with, if he is hungry, he will eat, and we will not force him or encourage him to eat more. But later in the evening, he'll ask for a snack. Do you have any advice, and should we be doing anything differently?
Yeah. So it's how we were sort of talking about foods a little more neutrally. I think, you know, there are times where it is appropriate to offer a snack after dinner. I would guess, I think it's just being mindful about what sort of the purpose of that snack is, and maybe trying to rotate the options of that snack. So if you're noticing they, you know, won't touch the dinner, and then they're looking, because they sort of know that they're, you know, probably not at 2 years old, may not be thinking about that yet, but as they're a little older, if they're sort of purposely not eating something to knowing that they'll have a certain snack later, then it might be helpful to sort of vary the options. You have them sort of maybe pick from a few preset options, have it not be anything that's too much more exciting than they'd have at other times. And, you know, maybe trying to have it be a little bit separate from the dinner. But, you know, there is definitely sort of a, you know, if there really is a long gap between the dinner and going to bed, then it is, you know, reasonable to offer a snack. Any other thoughts?
Thank you. Our next question: what would be your response to children who say they will keep eating certain unhealthy foods simply because they really enjoy them?
That could be a good opportunity to talk about, like, the mindful eating strategies, like, what does your belly feel like when it feels full? What does your belly feel like when it feels hungry? That's a good opportunity there. But also, it might be, totally depends on what your situation is. They might be hungrier or feeling hungrier because the meal isn't super well balanced, depends on what the snack is. If it's mostly carbohydrates, then they might not feel super full until the stretch reflex comes and their, like, belly is actually really full and they're over full. Whereas if you balance things with protein and fats, they can start to feel, and fiber, they can feel fuller a little bit faster. So combination of, like, actually talking about what does that feel like, and offering it in a balanced way. But by no means is it like a bad thing that they enjoy it. That's perfectly healthy, to really like those foods and like the flavor. It's not called highly palatable for no reason. It's tasty. But, you know, kind of thinking about how do we talk about the balance and what are we getting from all of these foods? What can offering something else on the side provide? And really thinking about, like, am I hungry or am I not hungry? And having those kind of structured meal times can be helpful too.
Great. Okay. Next one. Do you think a smoothie is a good substitution for a meal if the kid does not want to eat the whole solid food?
Yeah, it's like some of that is a little similar to what we were talking about with sort of that after dinner snack. I think keeping in mind it is normal to have some variation from meal to meal at these ages, and more looking at a picture of, throughout the week, are they, eating most of the meals, getting in most of the food groups? Does their pediatrician have any concerns about their growth? But if, they're struggling with some of the meals, it is fine to maybe offer another opportunity at a snack, or maybe towards the end of a meal or before bed, a smoothie. I would just caution, some of them, depending if you're adding in a lot of nutrient dense or high calorie ingredients, they could fill kids up a bit. So you wouldn't want to offer it, right before they eat. But if it is okay to, offer some of the foods and then, offer that afterwards or as a snack. And if the kid maybe helps pick out some of the ingredients that are going in there, then they might be a little bit more likely to try it.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay, our next one. If a family has limited access to healthy foods, whether it's related to time, finances, location, what are some tips that you would offer to help integrate healthy whole foods into their lives?
Yeah, so that is something we are seeing a little bit, at least from the cost of foods. We've been seeing that recently. The grocery bills have been quite high. And some people are still, sort of being financially affected by the pandemic. So there is some work being done to kind of increase some of the food programs like WIC, SNAP, which is also called food stamps. The Massachusetts has made this year, and hopefully in future years, school lunches free. But you can definitely reach out to any of your providers through MGH or elsewhere. And there's lots of other programs that we can see if someone's eligible for. And, kind of seeing, what are some ways to add some things in. So there are some, there are, some recipes and things that focus on kind of lower cost ingredients, and just sort of seeing, is there small ways that you can add a little something in. So maybe it's just trying to add in something throughout the day, or kind of slowly reducing some of the kind of fast food or on the go meals. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a quick switch over to, completely different foods in the diet.
Okay.
I just put in the chat a link to a woman has a downloadable PDF recipe book that are good and cheap. So something that if you wanted to get specific recipes, there's a link there.
Great. I know you and Simona have dropped quite a few things in the chat. So for anyone who is looking for those resources they've mentioned, they're all in there.
Kelly, it looks like you sent it to the hosts and panelists instead of to the whole group.
Sorry.
But that one is a great resource, so I want to make sure everyone gets it.
Yeah, there we go. All right, and our last question that I see right now, what are some kid-friendly ways to include kids in the process of grocery shopping and preparing healthy foods?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's so many different, I know, kind of depending on the child and their age. Did you have any thoughts, Meaghan?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's fun to allow your child to pick out like a fruit or vegetable for the week. Like, what are we going to try? What looks good? And talking about that, and just getting them excited about a new food that you might offer that week. There's great there's another resource we use, chopchopmagazine.org, which has really great like kid and family friendly recipes. And the recipes, the steps in the recipe really kind of guide, like, the kid can do this part, you got a grown up for that part. So they're good like that. But anytime, like, I always have my young kids like peel garlic, stuff like that. Take the grapes off the vine, something like as simple as that is really helpful. Allowing them to put things in bowls and stuff like that. Older kids can start working with knives with adult supervision, cutting up fruits and vegetables. Those are all great ways to get your kid involved in the process.
And even if initially it's just them sort of being around you or helping cooking and pick things out, we do still find it does, eventually increase the chances of them trying it or actually eating it.
Great. Let me just check the chat box one more time. I don't see any other questions that have come through. But thank you all so much. This is always a great presentation, and I'm glad that the three of you could present today. And from here, I'll pass it over to Amy to wrap up.
Thank you so much. As I had mentioned, today's session is being recorded. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.